Hello everyone and welcome back to the Red Path. Today we're going to become math nerds. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Blood Tithe, our favourite mechanic from the new Codex World Eaters. A really fun tool that lets us really kind of customise and power up our army over the state of the game, depending on what's happening, quite frankly. And generally what's happening is stuff is dying. Your stuff, the enemy stuff, everything. If it dies, Blood Tithe is scored, and we are then allowed to generate Blood Tithe points, which go towards upgrading our army and or scoring victory points. So first off, let's start with just going over the mechanic itself. It's on the screen right now. I'll read it out verbatim, just in case people are just listening, not watching, and kind of go into it a little bit. So, if every unit from your army has the World Eaters keyword, excluding models with the Agent of Chaos or unaligned, so your allies like Khorne demons or Chaos Knights will still allow you to keep this as long as you're within the Battle Brothers restrictions. You can gain Blood Tithe points over the course of the battle, as described below. Keep a note of your Blood Tithe points total. So each time a unit is destroyed, gain 1 point. At the end of each phase, if any character, monster or vehicle units were destroyed, gain 1 additional. At the end of each phase, if any Titanic units were destroyed that phase, you gain 1 additional. So you can score multiple Blood Tithe points in every phase of the game. So if you kill a vehicle and 2 infantry units in the shooting phase somehow, you'll get 4 Blood Tithe points. If you then kill the same again in the fight phase, you'll get another 4 because it is locked to the phase. But if you kill 2 vehicles in the same phase, you'll only get 3. 2 for the first one, 1 for the second. And similarly, if you kill 1 vehicle and 1 character, or 1 monster and 1 character, you'll only get 3 if they're in the same phase. That does sometimes cause a little bit of confusion for folks just coming into the army or newer players in general, but it is locked to the phase and you only get the bonus for the first kill, and technically you score that at the end of the phase, but it doesn't really matter because you can't spend until the end of the phase anyway. And that's the second point. You spend your Blood Tithe at the end of the phase if you are buying something off of the Blood Tithe table, and end of the battle round if you're spending them on the Pile the Skulls secondary, which we'll talk about next actually. So let's go into that. Let me bring up this. So on the screen now you'll see some really fancy text. 3 basic equations. There's multiple ways you can spend for Pile the Skulls, but Pile the Skulls is our pretty much auto-take secondary. Basically at the end of each battle round you can spend as many Blood Tithe points as you want, but there is obviously a sensible limit, and you will score victory points based on what you spend. So if you spend 1 Blood Tithe point, you'll score 2 victory points. If you spend 2 Blood Tithe points, you'll get 4 victory points, and if you spend 3, you'll get 6, but it is capped at 5, so you'll only score the 5. So I've basically figured out, this is just my opinion, you know, and this is the math part of the course here. 3 ways to score your Blood Tithe that you can basically choose on a game-to-game basis. And it's not really possible to determine this before the game. I don't think you should have a set-in-stone plan. It will be opponent dependent, it will be terrain, it will be army, all the normal stuff, but it's really based on the momentum of the game. How quickly is combat engaged? How quickly is stuff dying? If your opponent is playing very cagey and there's been basically only 1 or 2 kills in the first couple of rounds, you may have to do the late game variant here, which I'm going to explain in a moment. So like I said, I've got 3 variations here, and there are other ways to do it. These are just the 3 most common, I feel. There's the efficient way, where in any order here, you're going to spend 2, 2, 2, and 1 for a total of 7 Blood Tithe points over the 5 rounds of the game, but you'll only score 14 victory. But what that means is each Blood Tithe point you spend is scoring you 2 victory points. So you don't have that kind of inefficient loss where if you spend 3 you only gain 5, so they're only worth like 1 1/3 each, or 1 2/3, whatever the numbers are there. So this way is if you really need to score high and well on your Pile the Skulls secondary, But because of maybe the enemy's running a very elite army, or you're running quite an elite army, say you're running an Angron list or something like that, with fewer units that will die, you may not have the multitude of resources to spend because you really know you need a couple of Feel No Pains bought and things like that. This is one you can look at. So generally, guidelines for this will be, like I said, if you and your opponent certainly are both running armies with fewer units, you're going into custodies or perhaps Imperial Knights with like 2 big knights, maybe even 3 big knights. So although they'll give up 3 per, assuming they die in different phases, your total will be less than normal going into like a GSC list or something like that. So it is an efficient way, but you do only score the 14. So if you ended up losing the game by 1 or, failing to get a tie by 1, that'd kind of suck. But it is an option. The second is probably the most frequent way that people are using Blood Tithe, and this is spending 2-2-2-2. You're basically spending 8 Blood Tithe points. You should get 16 victory points out of this, but you don't. You get 15 because the secondary cap's at 15. So you're scoring 4 in the second round, probably 4 in the third round, 4 in the fourth round. So you're at 12, and then in the last round you're going to spend another 2, get the 4, but it will cap at 15. So you get a little bit of waste there. It's nothing to feel bad about. Like, this isn't like we're not hyper min maxing here, because victory points are victory points. That's what wins you the game. This is probably going to be the most common way, I feel, in your average kind of tempo game. You're just going to be spending 2 at the end of each battle. Round 2 doesn't feel bad. You're pretty certain to have, by the end of round 2, 2 Blood Tithe points, unless you really needed to spend the 6 on a res for Angron, or on the auto-wounding 6s, say you're going into Imperial or a Knight faction, something like that. But typically, I still think you'll have access to this in most every game, unless your opponent really tries to deny you, in which case they're probably not playing the game. And then the third one is what I've been using recently. I don't know if this is necessarily the best. It's just how I've been structuring the tempo of my games. And also a lot of my practice games don't have much dying early on, because I play into Death Guard quite frequently, and they're very hard to kill early on until you really meet combat in like the mid to late game. So this is spending typically in rounds 3, 4 and 5, 3, 3 and 3. You're spending 9 Blood Tithe points, you're scoring 15, but you've spent enough to score 18, so you are losing basically a victory point on each spend. Yeah, it's okay. This is one that you can use, obviously, if your opponent's playing very cagey, or you don't have the means to get the kills off early in the game. You still have that path for the 15, but it does limit you. You can see there, because you're spending 9, that's 2 Blood Tithe points you're not spending on something else, as opposed to using the more efficient version, right? So that's just a kind of overview on ways you can structure your scoring for Pile the Skulls. I think you can do whatever you want, quite frankly, and you're not beholden to take that secondary. I think you should if you're looking to win the game, because it is essentially a free 15 victory points, but you might not like it, and that's absolutely fine. But competitively speaking, you're probably taking it, right? So here's some ways to look at it in that context. So next, let's look at, let's make sure I do this right, the tithes. Okay, so we'll start them off. I'm going to talk about each one briefly, and kind of go over the pros and cons of it, maybe when you should use it and when you shouldn't. So we'll start off with the cheapest here. We've got Spiteful Nullification. It's the 5-up against Mortal Wounds. So this is one you want to buy as soon as possible if you are going into Grey Knights, if you're going into Thousand Suns, probably Chaos Demons, unless it's a pure Khorne Demon or Khorne Heavy list or something like that. And even they can, I think, have access to a couple of strats that put out Mortal Wounds and the Warp Storm and stuff like that. Basically, if you don't know what your enemy's army does, one of the good questions to ask at the start of the game is, hey, what's your Mortal Wound output like? Maybe they've got a smite or 2. Generally, a rule I use, if they've got access to more than 2 smites per round, per psychic phase, you're probably wanting this quite soon. Or if they're running like Contemptors or Decimators or something like that, if they have something that's consistently putting out some Mortal Wounds, grab this. It is very useful, and it really destabilizes your opponent's average math on kills. just because, you know, keeping an extra obsec model alive on an objective or what have you really changes the flow of the game sometimes. So this one, like I said, if your opponent has got more than 2 smites worth a round of mortal wound output, whatever way that comes in. So basically, if they can do more than 4 mortal wounds a round to you, I'd probably get this either first or very, very quickly. So next, let's look at Wrathful Devotion. This is the 6-up Feel No Pain. This one, in general terms, should be, in my opinion, and I know a lot of people disagree, this should be the first thing you buy where possible. Having a 6-up Feel No Pain across your entire World Eaters part of your army gives you 20% more wounds, basically. I know that sounds weird because, you know, it's only a 6-up Feel No Pain, so that should be, you know, like 17%. I'm not really a very good mathematician, but I've read about how the 6-up Feel No Pain, what it does is because the 6-up, if it succeeds, that wound that would have been lost is still there to generate the opportunity for another 6-up. So it actually comes up to about 20% buff on a 17% roll. And because we have a lot of 3 wound models available, and you know we're probably still running some rhinos or other transports, Angron is a great one for this. Even jackals. Jackals are kind of obnoxious with a 6-up Feel No Pain because they are obsec as well. And 10 to 20 in a unit, it could be a lot for an opponent to get through. And with the plethora of melter or melter type weapons in the game right now, especially amongst your marines, that can really help out. If they only roll a 1 or a 2 for damage, or 2+1 or something like that, you get a cheeky 6 up there on your 8 bound. That makes a heck of a difference, and it wastes a lot of your opponent's efficiency. So I definitely recommend, even though at 4 it's a little more expensive, definitely get this one as soon as possible. Depending on the opponent, again, if they've got a lot of psychic or mortal wound output, probably go for the 5-up first and then get this. You don't get to stack them on a mortal wound, but you do get to stack them like on a wound roll from a contemptor. You get to use the 6-up on the 2 damage and then the 5-up on the mortal wound that spills over. So next, let's go into Rage Fueled Invigoration. +1 to charge. I actually really hate this as a Blood Tithe, but I understand why it's there. Because typically it's only applicable for 1 real turn or go turn. It will come up, obviously, in almost every round of the game. But there's going to be a turn typically where we bring our reserves in, or we need to make a clutch charge, and it's going to be that 9-inch charge or an icon charge or something like that. And it really helps for that. You know, coupling this with a 3d6 and the opportunity for a CP reroll on a charge, it can really make things very reliable. But an 8-inch charge from Deep Strike is still not great if it's your regular, like an 8-bound charge or something like that with no icon. But it is very good, and it is only 3 Blood Tithes, so it is fairly cheap. It just depends on what the game state is going to be like. If your opponent is coming to you, you're not going to need it. But if your opponent is cagey, or it's like maybe Imperial Guard and they didn't put their Sentinels forward for you or anything like that, you may need this because some armies you absolutely have to get into combat and start tagging them down and causing fallback issues and things like that. So unfortunately, this is going to be a common one to buy just because you need it, and then unfortunately it becomes redundant because once you're in combat you generally don't need it because you're working on with 2, 3, 4-inch charges in their lines, right? So next we'll look at Martial Excellence. This is an unmodified hit roll of 6, scores 1 additional hit. Basically Death to the False Emperor. We have had a shit ton of discussion of this versus +1 to hit and which is better. And honestly, the jury's still out. People are very, very adamant on one or the other. Ultimately, the difference in like high-level maths between this and +1 is very, very minimal. If you're going into an army that is -1 to hit across the board or can't be hit on 4s, like, you know, trans-hit units and things like that, this will be better. Basically, it's preference. Do you like rolling a lot of dice? Do you feel like you roll a lot of 6s to hit? Go for this. It's hard to say. Or if you're running a lot of Exalted 8-bound and Angron and things that hit on 2s, or you feel like the terrain is going to allow you to set to defend a lot because you're going into an aggressive army and things like that, go for this over the +1. Other than that, maybe at some point we'll do a breakdown of the fine maths on these. But it's really a personal preference. I'm not going to tell you one is better than the other because I honestly don't know. I've heard very convincing arguments from both sides. Speaking of which, Savage Guidance. So yeah, +1 to hit. If you're running an army that's spamming jackals or mostly 8-bound and less exalted 8-bound, a lot of berserkers, it's a great buff. It really feels nice to hit on 2s with a lot of your units. But again, it's very, very similar to exploding 6s. Next we go on to Warp Blades, which is extra AP. So this is awesome if you're going into an army that's got a lot of 3-up saves or any common save that your berserkers and jackals typically are not, they're still getting an armor save, whether it's a 4-up, 5-up or 6-up. If you can push that beyond, that's awesome. If you're going into regular Marines that don't have an invul, your anything that's got -3, so your eviscerators and things, you push that to -4. The jump from giving them a 6-up to no save is absolutely massive. Like, it's not a 17% buff, it's a 1,000,000% buff, because taking that opportunity from your opponent to spike the 6s on a save roll is wonderful. If they cannot save, it's so much better than having even a 1 in 20 chance of a save or something, right? But this is very opponent dependent. If you're going into something like Harlequins that just have a 5-up invul across the board, you're not going to need this. Like, you're losing efficiency anyway because we're paying a premium for a lot of high AP in our combat weapons. Yet you literally don't need this. We have no way to remove invuls outside of like the avocado on himself or some Khorne allies. So yeah, this one is very matchup specific. But if you're going into power armor especially, this is a great one. Power armor with few involves. Like if you're going into, I think it's Black Templars, they can get a 5-up across the board. Thousand Sons get a 5-up invol across the board. You don't need it. But in other cases, definitely against power armor, this is a good one to pick. Total Carnage. So this is 6 Blood Tithe points, and it's 6 to hit, automatically wound. This is one I'm only going to consider if I'm going into Knights or maybe a guard list that has either huge blobs of infantry or lots of tanks, or both, quite frankly. The reason for the huge blobs, an issue I found is 8-bound and exalted 8-bound to a lesser sense, but they're different target priority. But 8-bound actually kind of suffer from a low volume, although they individually have high volume. Essentially 7 attacks on a model, and you've got 3 models in there, but they hit on 3s, so you're actually losing one, and it kind of, you actually don't get much through. So taking out the step of wounding, because you're going to roll plenty of 1s when you're going into 10 guardsmen, right? It's just the way that goes. Can help a lot. But I wouldn't say do it because of guardsmen, do it because of toughness 8 and toughness 9 tanks. Or toughness 8 knights across the board and stuff. Anything where you really need to guarantee you're forcing your opponent to roll dice to save and stay alive, that's probably the best use for it. But, if you've just got Blood Tithe points out the ass, 6s hit, all wound is just an awesome mechanic to have access to. And then finally Reborn in Blood. I haven't used this yet because I haven't run Angron yet. I know Dower and Jack have both run him, and their advice to me is generally don't do it so much. It's more of a trap. It's the psyops, it's the threat of having Angron come back. Not to say don't do it ever, but don't spend 18 CP, Blood Tithe points on this during a game. Maybe have it to come in late game to be a force multiplier or something like that. But it's 6 Blood Tithe, and it will generally be 4 because you get 2 from Angron dying most of the time. Use it sometimes, sometimes not. So basically, I haven't tiered these in any real way, I guess. Let me just pull that up. I haven't tiered the Blood Tithes in an auto way to use them. I do think there is generally on a game level at the table a probable path you should take. Typically will involve starting with one of the Feel No Pains first, then probably getting the +1 to charge, and then probably getting some kind of hit buff or AP buff, whether it's +1 to hit, exploding 6 is your preference, or the extra AP will be the first combat type buff you will want to give yourself. And then this way, when I use my late game Pile the Skulls, I can normally get at least a Feel No Pain, +1 to charge, and 1 buff up, and then I know, based on the game state or what I've already got, that I'm going to get my 15 on Pile is kind of a given. And then maybe late game I can throw up another buff. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, because I know some players are just spamming buff straight away and ignoring feel no pains, or just never use the +1 to charge. This isn't a guide for how you should play, it's just a guide to give you a bit more information and something to think about and consider when you are using and spending your blood tithe points, and how to maximize the efficiency from them. But yeah, hopefully this was reasonably helpful. Maybe gave you a little bit of insight into something, a new way to think about it, a new way to think about spending it for Pile the Skulls. There's lots of other things that tie into this. How to build your list to score the maximum blood tithe points. You'll see that 3x1 spawn and a couple of rhinos is super popular, or rapier batteries, the 5 wound, quad heavy bolters for 75 points that give up 2 blood tithe points. There's lots of ways to kind of min-max how you're going to generate, how you stage, how you bring them in from reserves in different turns to really kind of up the ante on your generation. But I can't really teach that in a video. I can't explain that in a video. It's more about, you have to be at the table, you have to look at list construction and things like that. But there's a lot to figure out and a lot to think about in how you really score your blood tithe, how you generate them, and how you're going to use them in the game on a moment-to-moment basis. And really that takes your understanding, you fully comprehending the impact of each decision and how that's going to impact the next turn and the next round and the remainder of the game's scoring. So yeah, anyway, hopefully this has been helpful. That's the end of this one, folks. Thanks for watching along. Please join our Discord. There will be a link below. Make sure you check us out on Spotify and Twitch. Darrow's been streaming like an absolute mad lad over on Twitch, doing his Only Mortals. And we are uploading some episodes to Spotify. All the links are below, like I said. And once again, please join the Discord. Alright, folks, until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill main burn.